Welcome back to Aesthetics. I'm Chris, and there are a few questions we need to answer. Just past the halfway point of their first season, how have the new Fanatics NHL jerseys been holding up? What's the verdict on this season's outdoor uniform designs? We'll dive into the Winter Classic and the newly unveiled Stadium Series jerseys. Plus, what could we expect next season when those same outdoor events both arrive in the Sunshine State for the first time? All that and much more as Aesthetics presents Jersey Watch, the 24-25 Midseason Recap. Well, it feels like we first need to talk about Fanatics in general. At last check-in, we all had our fingers crossed, hoping this new deal wouldn't end up being the biggest blunder in NHL history, given some of the company's unfortunate flubs in the retail category. Were the Fanatics on-ice jerseys doomed to the same fate? As it turns out, no. Like I said in my season preview, unless you are actively looking for the shoulder dimples or new Fanatics branding on the neckline, you probably never even noticed the change happened at all. The only negative thing I've really come across was this photo from last September. In a team skate the week before training camp started, Matty Beniers was seen on the Seattle Kraken's official Instagram account with a torn Fanatics practice jersey, where it would seem a seam separated. Of course, there was never any official word on how the jersey ripped in the first place, but that was it. The fact that it's really the only example kind of proved it was a non-issue in the larger sense, and nothing like this has been reported in a game, to my knowledge, leaving the verdict on the new Fanatics on-ice NHL jerseys. So far, so good. They're holding up as well as you'd expect, and as well as the Adidas product that preceded them. And that covers the physical makeup of the jerseys, but what about the design aspect? The vast majority of what teams are wearing this season was designed under Adidas. That includes the Ducks and Kings rebrands. Utah doesn't really have a final design yet, but technically, these temporary jerseys did fall squarely into the Fanatics era. To get a true understanding of the creative capabilities of Fanatics, we have to look at their first outdoor game, the recent NHL Winter Classic. Shortly after my last video is when the new Winter Classic jerseys were officially unveiled, November 19th. We'd gotten our first look at Chicago's design by way of a leak last August. This official reveal served as confirmation and explained some of the design choices. For one thing, the Blackhawks jersey features the faux lace neck collar, a staple of retro-inspired NHL uniforms since the Reebok era. Obviously, they don't serve the practical purpose of holding the jersey together around the neck, it's just an aesthetic thing, which is fine, but here again, Fanatics describes it as reminiscent of hockey's early days. But is it really? In hockey's early days, there were no lace neck collars. In fact, the earliest NHL sweaters were all turtlenecks. For a true throwback feel, let's see that make a comeback. Plus, they can embed some neck protection materials inside the collar and make these the safest jerseys ever worn. The lace-up collar everyone seems to think of as an original feature of NHL jerseys did not come along until almost a quarter century later, when the Montreal Canadiens introduced it in 1941. For a decade, they were the only team that had that style collar. The Rangers, Blackhawks, and Maple Leafs all joined in the 1950s. But by the mid-70s, the fad had passed, and the V-neck became standard across the NHL. That aside, most of the other subtle touches of this uniform were fairly straightforward, like the use of the six-pointed stars in the crest, borrowed from Chicago's iconic flag. After we initially saw this design over the summer, I was prepared to say the NHL was in supremely capable hands with Fanatics designers, many of whom had recently transitioned from Adidas, working under the guidance of Senior Creative Director Dom Fillion, one of the creators of the Addy Zero jerseys.
We're just getting started.
And then we saw what they built for the St. Louis Blues. Now, I understand the final decision for any jersey design rests with the club itself. So you can't entirely blame the designers for a flop. I mean, we don't really know what all they pitched. But to land on this feels like an absolute whiff. If you've watched my Winter Classic uniform ranking video, you've been subjected to my seemingly singular perspective on the overuse of vintage white, where designers frequently employ a cream coloring in a phony attempt to force a jersey to look older than it is. But I don't mean to beat a dead horse here. That video may have left some viewers with the mistaken impression that I have some sort of personal hatred of vintage white, but really I don't. The truth is far more nuanced. Sometimes I like it. Sometimes it really works, as it does in this case for the Blackhawks. The off-white goes with the red and black to deliver a historic look and feel. The whole style just really comes together here. Which brings us back to the Blues. I mean, what were they thinking? Usually I find vintage white works when it's used in smaller doses, a worthwhile accent color maybe, but it's trickier when you try to make the entire jersey that color, though it can be done. I think a nice sharp contrast is key, but adjoined with these thin yellow stripes and a faded blue, maybe not so much. And to make matters worse, the crest on this Blues jersey is pitiful. I don't know how else to say it. Fanatics argues that it's an interpretation of the unused prototype jerseys shown off in a local newspaper in 1966, shortly after the franchise was founded. But those jerseys had their day at a team event during the 2017 Winter Classic hosted in St. Louis, and then they got to see NHL action in yellow for Adidas's Reverse Retro program. While it's been fun to revisit, I kind of hope the Blues are ready to move on from that design. There's a reason they never went with it in the first place. By the way, one last element of note, check out the hemline tags on these jerseys, both of which pay tribute to the respective flags of each team's home city. We saw the 6-pointed star from Chicago was also on the crest, and there's the fleur-de-lis from St. Louis's flag. Cool little details there. So, here's how I'd like to sum up the Winter Classic with no particular year in its title. The Blackhawks dressed brilliantly, but played poorly, while the Blues dressed poorly, but played brilliantly. I think that about sums it up. And by the way, I am going to start referring to this as the 2025 Winter Classic, even though it was played on New Year's Eve in 2024, but they have now scheduled the next game for January of 2026. More on that in a second, but first, let's finish out this season. On January 16th, Fanatics and the NHL revealed the uniforms for the 2025 Stadium Series between the Detroit Red Wings and Columbus Blue Jackets. On March 1st, the teams will meet at Ohio Stadium on the campus of Ohio State University. And they seem to have a little fun at the expense of the Michigan alumni who currently suit up for Columbus. But no, they will not be wearing Buckeyes jerseys. Instead, the Blue Jackets will stick to their standard navy blue with a fresh take on the Cannon logo up front. There's some metallic silver striping along with some red accents. The captain's patches are set inside a container in the shape of Ohio. The sleeve stripes are an oversized reference to Civil War military insignia, as is the new CBJ shoulder patch. We also have a couple of other hanger effect designs on this jersey. Inside the collar is the team name, and inside the back hem is the name of the event. On the pants, there's an isolated version of the silver star from the team's primary logo, along with silver and red stripes down the hips. The left side of the helmet has the player's uniform number, but none of the photos or videos provided by Fanatics give us a really good look at the right side. Overall, a solid debut outdoor jersey for Columbus. And next, we'll take a look at the Red Wings. The first thing you notice is the red Detroit script crest on the white jersey. This is an entirely new design. It's finished with laser perforated details, as are the jersey numbers and captain's lettering. A subtle striping detail can be seen with the embossed effect along the sleeves, and the club's standard primary logo adorns the left shoulder. Unsurprisingly, not a ton of creativity here from the Red Wings. They're mostly known for playing it safe with any kind of specialty jersey. However, they did have a little fun with the helmet. On both sides, the wing, without the wheel, protrudes from the player's temple. There's also a white stripe that runs over the top to mimic a football helmet, with the game being played in a football stadium. And you can also see here that there's a reverse color name bar in the standard arched layout. The pants feature the Hockeytown word mark on the right leg. It's also inside the collar for the hanger effect. And just like the Blue Jackets jersey, the event title is seen on the inside hemline. But the coolest feature of this jersey is one that's easy to miss. A subtle nod to the Red Wings mascot, Al the Octopus, with this small hemline tag. And that's pretty much it. I still prefer the risks taken with Detroit's last Stadium Series design from 2016, but that said, this is not a bad look at all. I do like the attention to detail on the new script especially. But before we get to this Stadium Series in March, there's a new NHL event on the horizon. The Four Nations Face-Off is now just around the corner, starting February 12th. NHL players from 4 countries will take part in a mini tournament to whet our appetites for the 2026 Olympics next year in Italy. I briefly covered the uniforms in my last Jersey Watch, but let's take a closer look now. We have 4 teams in 4 distinct colors, each team wearing only one jersey throughout the tournament. Canada is in red with a newly fashioned maple leaf on the chest. Team USA will dress in navy blue, featuring a fresh type design that's extremely intricate. There's also a secondary shield logo not seen on the jerseys, which is even more ornate. Of course, there's also a much cleaner version in their style guide. Sweden is yellow with their usual Tre Kronor or 3-crown motif front and center. And speaking of ornate designs, this crest takes the cake, though it's a completely different internal design from what Adidas created for Sweden in the 2016 World Cup of Hockey. And finally, there's Finland wearing white. The nation's name in its native tongue is prominent in a 2-toned blue effect on the chest, positioned above the Finnish coat of arms, also treated in blue instead of red. The lighter blue stripe on the sleeves contains an embossed design, appearing to be the roses that surround the lion in the coat of arms. Now, because each of the 4 jerseys are a color and style that clash with all the others, there's seemingly no need for alternate jerseys or distinctive home and away sets. Like I said, the tournament kicks off on Wednesday, February 12th in Montreal. I think it's a fair time to give a little sneak peek into next season. In particular, the NHL just announced the hosts and opponents for the 2026 outdoor games, the next Winter Classic and Stadium Series. And in a novel move by a league looking to broaden its horizons, both games will take place in Florida. The announcement also promises better competition in next year's marquee events. This season was the first I can remember where none of the outdoor games featured teams in playoff contention, maybe Columbus, let alone perennial Stanley Cup contenders. It led to the smallest TV audience ever for a Winter Classic, as the host team sat dead last in the standings, and proved why once the puck dropped. The league announced this Florida-centric slate after 5 consecutive years of Florida teams appearing in the Stanley Cup final, with the Panthers winning their first cup last season and the Lightning going back-to-back in 2020 and 21. A month-long celebration of Sunshine State hockey begins with the 2026 Winter Classic on Friday, January 2nd, as the Florida Panthers host the New York Rangers at Lone Depot Park, home of the Miami Marlins. It all culminates with the 2026 Stadium Series on Sunday, February 1st, when the Tampa Bay Lightning welcome the Boston Bruins to Raymond James Stadium, home of the Buccaneers. I'm a little curious how the league arrived at these designations. If the Winter Classic is about the tradition of the game, well, it's funny to have either Florida team involved, but to me it's always seemed like the Lightning's brand was more in line with that concept. Despite playing in a non-traditional market, many in the Tampa Bay organization seem to feel tradition-oriented, even down to the original 6 inspired jerseys that they wear every night. By comparison, the Panthers' history is marked by flashy, trendy designs, what the Stadium Series aesthetic is most known for. Not to mention, the Lightning already played in a Stadium Series 3 years ago in Nashville. All I can think is that it came down to venue availability. If not for last year's hurricane damage, Tropicana Field in St. Pete would have been a hugely fun Winter Classic throwback, as the Lightning played there for 3 seasons when it was known as the Thunderdome. As a kid, I went to my first NHL games in that building. But with Raymond James as the only viable option to host an outdoor matchup, and the possibility of the Bucs still needing their stadium in January, the obvious choice was to hold off until February and make it a Stadium Series game. The other obvious reason for this date? It's Gasparilla Weekend in Tampa. An outdoor NHL game coinciding with the city's annual Pirate celebration will make for one busy weekend. And with that, let's talk a bit about jerseys and branding. What would you like to see? With the Stadium Series in Tampa happening alongside Gasparilla, a pirate theme seems fairly obvious. They toyed with that concept in the elements of the 2018 NHL All-Star branding, and maybe they can go all in this time, especially playing at the home of the Buccaneers. In the past, the Lightning have worn these pirate-themed jerseys for warm-ups, back when that was allowed, and even put this design on sale to fans with a limited edition release last year. For the 2022 Stadium Series, the Lightning reimagined their Bolts jerseys, so as hosts, they really should do something fresh. As for Boston, this will be their first ever Stadium Series appearance. They've made frequent appearances in the Winter Classic where they've exhausted their throwback ideas, so I can't wait to see how the designers imagine a futuristic Bruins jersey. Down in Miami for the Winter Classic, that feels so strange to say, I'm envisioning something like what we saw in 2020 between Dallas and Nashville, a new design for Florida meant to feel like a throwback. I still think that Dallas jersey was one of the best ever, so if they bring this energy to the Panthers, it's got to be a winner. On the other hand, the 100-year-old Rangers will have the perfect opportunity to debut a proper throwback that they could use throughout their centennial season. I'm not saying New York should go all out the way Boston did with a full lineup of special designs, but at least a great alternate. That said, the Rangers have been fairly consistent with their uniform design, really since year one. That old jersey still looks quite familiar today. And New York has a history of launching uniform changes to mark major anniversaries. For their 20th, in 1946, they swapped the diagonal lettering for an arch design. When they turned 25, they added the first white jersey in franchise history, and that one hasn't really changed since it debuted in 1951. For their 50th anniversary, the Rangers put their classic shield logo on the chest for the first time over a new shade of blue, but no one really liked it, and they switched back after 2 seasons. But when they turned 70, they introduced the Lady Liberty third jersey, and everyone seemed to love that one. And their 85th season brought this heritage alternate. I can't wait to see what they do in year 100. Anyway, both of these games have the potential for some phenomenal uniform designs. While I'm excited for my home state to be the center of the hockey world for a bit, it does feel like time for another heritage classic north of the border. The NHL typically schedules them every third season or so, and the last one was October of 2023 for the Outdoor Battle of Alberta. The NHL has not announced anything yet, but I would love to see a Heritage Classic in the spring or fall of 2026. Imagine a 100th anniversary rematch of the 1926 Stanley Cup Final, the last one before the NHL took full control of Lord Stanley's Challenge Cup. I could see the Montreal Canadiens representing the Montreal Maroons, with the Vancouver Canucks representing the Victoria Cougars, all with amazing throwback uniforms to match. It would also mark the 110th anniversary of the Canadiens' first ever Stanley Cup championship when they beat the Portland Rosebuds in 1916. So potentially there's a lot of historical fun to be had with the next Heritage Classic. So I'm voting for Montreal and Vancouver in 2026. All right, I have a lot more to talk about for the 25-26 season, including third jerseys and Utah's final branding, but I'm going to save that for an upcoming video so I can go back and wrap up some news from the current season. First up, a quick recap on this season's jersey retirements. Back on November 23rd, the San Jose Sharks raised Joe Thornton's number 19 to the rafters. During the game that night, Sharks players wore this patch on their jerseys, featuring Jumbo Joe's iconic beard. Then, more recently on January 12th, number 12 went up for the Carolina Hurricanes, as Eric Staal was honored that night. Speaking of player celebrations, we've seen a few milestones commemorated with special jersey customizations. For example, in November, the Calgary Flames recognized Captain Michael Backlund for his 1,000th game in the NHL, with all of his teammates wearing his number 11 jersey, along with the C. But the most interesting one for me came on January 10th, when the Winnipeg Jets' Connor Hellebuck achieved a milestone trifecta: 300 wins, 40 shutouts, and 500 career NHL games. All 3 numbers were highlighted on the warm-up jerseys worn by the goalie and his teammates: a big 300 on the back, 40 on the left sleeve, and 500 on the right. Now, strictly speaking, Hellebuck reached the 500-game plateau last spring, and on March 30th, he took warm-ups wearing a number 500 jersey. This season, the entire team took part in the celebration. Now, let's look at a few other special nights. October 25th was Oilers Hall of Fame night. With Craig McTavish and Randy Gregg being inducted, Edmonton players wore this shoulder patch on their jerseys. On November 8th, the Toronto Maple Leafs hosted their annual Hockey Hall of Fame game, hosting the Detroit Red Wings. Both teams wore the standard jersey patch, which is a tradition going back 25 years. What was out of the norm this year is that Detroit wore that same patch again on their own a couple weeks later at home when they honored Pavel Datsyuk's induction into the Hockey Hall of Fame. And in the aftermath of the unprecedented wildfires that wiped out entire communities in Los Angeles, the Kings are paying tribute to local firefighters with this patch on their shoulders, as well as a new center ice design at their arena. All right, last item. For those of you keeping track of helmet colors, now that the NHL has relaxed its rules, 2 teams have maintained their commitment to wearing their color helmets with their white road jerseys, the Carolina Hurricanes and San Jose Sharks. But I happened to notice that they've each worn white buckets for just 1 game so far this season, and it was against the same opponent, the Vegas Golden Knights. It reads to me like Vegas has banned opponents from wearing their color helmets at T-Mobile Arena. It's kind of a funny stand to take, but there you go. Meanwhile, the newly rebranded Anaheim Ducks have been going back and forth on what color helmets they bring on road trips this season. It's been about 50-50 so far. And then for a couple of standalones, the Washington Capitals used their Navy helmets for 2 separate road games this season in St. Louis and Nashville. All right, with that, I'm going to wrap this one up. I have a lot more to come, but I feel like this video is long enough, and I didn't want to delay it by making it even longer. I'm planning 2 new videos over the coming weeks. One will cover the PWHL and the minor leagues. I've been meaning to make time to go over all the new women's league jerseys, and there's a new ECHL expansion team that just revealed its name and logo. The other will be our first 2025 Jersey Watch with a look ahead to next season. At least one team has already declared plans to dump its 3rd jersey, so what new ones could we see next year? And what will the Utah team end up being named? So many videos, so little time. But that's all for now. Drop a like before you go if you enjoyed this one, and be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Thank you as always for watching, and see you next time.